Hello, welcome to my second tutorial on the Web Technology series. My name is Samuel and I will be taking you through this section. In this section, we are going to cover web browser reference architecture. And as part of this lesson, we will be looking at what a web browser is. The web browser reference architecture, that is what is composed or what makes up a web browser. The various components within the architecture, that is the components of web browser architecture. Then we move on to look at domain names and then how to register a domain name. So now let's begin. What is a web browser? Web browser is an application software or program designed to enable users access, retrieve, and view documents and other resources on the internet. So in simple terms, web browser can be termed as an application that enables users to navigate through the internet. So the web browser actually helps us to move through various websites on the internet. So examples of web browsers include Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Safari, and Microsoft Edge. There are others as well that we can talk of, such as the Opera and then the rest. So basically, this is the structure or this is the architecture of every web browser. So every web browser has the user interface. It also has the browser engine, the rendering engine, networking, JavaScript, XML, display backend, and then the data persistence. Do not worry, we are going to take time to look at each component and then how each component functions. So to begin with, let's first look at what the user interface is. So with the user interface, it includes every part of the web browser display except the window where you see the requested page. All right. So as I said, it includes every part of the web browser except the page where the requested page is shown. So aside where the requested page is loaded onto, the rest of the browser forms the interface. So we can talk of the navigation buttons, the URL, the address bar, the various tabs, add to favorite, search bar, bookmarks, web browser. So aside where the requested page is loaded, everything else you see on the web browser forms the user interface. Now let's move on to rendering engine, and then after we are done with the rendering engine, we come back to look at the browser engine. So with the rendering engine, it is responsible for converting markup documents into the form that can be understood by the user. We all understand that websites are written using a standard document, that is the HTML, a standard language, that is the HTML. And then with this language, it is written in markup form. So basically, websites are written using markup languages. So it is the work of the rendering engine to convert this markup language into the form that can be understood by a layman. So with this format or with this markup, it can only be understood by programmers or web developers. So it is the work of the rendering engine to convert these codes into this format that can be understood by a lay person or a non-programmer. Now let's move on to look at the browser engine. So with the browser engine, it provides an interface for the rendering engine. That is, it is responsible for loading the requested page onto the web browser. So after the rendering engine has converted the HTML document into the format that can be understood by the user, the browser engine then picks these rendered documents and then show it or renders it onto the web browser. So basically, it it loads the rendered HTML documents onto the page. So over here, that is where the rendered documents are being displayed. So we say it provides an interface for the rendering engine. So after the rendering engine has converted these HTML documents into the format that can be understood by the user, the browser engine picks it and then displays it to the user. Let's move on to look at the other components. We have networking. So it is responsible for sending HTTP request and HTTP response between the client and the server. So whenever the client requests a page, it is the work of the networking to send the request to the web server, access the content or the particular website, and then bring it to the browser to be displayed. So that is the work of the network. So it is responsible for data communication or data transition from the client side to the server and then from the server to the client. So from the client to the server, it makes a request. and then from the server to the client, it brings the response or the actual content the user requested for. Let's also look at UI backend. So with the UI backend, it is used to draw basic widgets like combo box and dialog box. So basically, the UI widget is responsible for giving some various widgets or various controls. Do you get it? So actually, those controls are not part of the web browsers, but they pick it out from the operating system and then displays it. So taking the combo box for Safari, this is how it looks like. It picks the native combo box of the web browser, of the operating system, and then renders it into the web browser. So actually, the UI component picks certain UI designs from the operating systems and then renders it into the web browser. So we can see that of Opera, which is for Windows. So it picks the combo box of Windows and then renders it into the web browser. The next one we will talk of is the JavaScript interpreter. So the JavaScript interpreter is used to parse and execute JavaScript codes. So within our HTML documents, we can have a JavaScript code written in it. So for this JavaScript code to be executed, there is a built-in JavaScript interpreter which executes the JavaScript code within the web browser. The next one is data persistence. So with the data persistence, it stores the browser data such as history, bookmarks, and the browser settings. So actually it's for storing various data that cannot be stored on the web server. So with our various history, the moment we browse through our web browser, after at the end of the day, we can move on to see the history, that is the various pages we've browsed through, and then the various bookmarks we store, and then the various browser settings. So with some browsers, we can set it to be in dark mode, and then whenever we open it, it will be in dark mode because it stores that. And so it is the work of the data persistence to store these browser data. And then the last one we will talk of is XML. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. So it is actually used to render XML documents within our web browser. Now let's move on to look at domain names. So what is a domain name? A domain name is a unique name that identifies a website. So they are actually names used to uniquely identify a website. So each website that we can access has a particular or a unique domain name that helps us or directs us to that particular website. So examples of domain name includes facebook.com, summersoft.com, and then google.com. So whenever we enter these domain names, it takes us directly to the website. So the domain name has been grouped into two parts. So we have the domain name and then the domain name extension. So basically with the domain name, it contains the name of the organization or the name of the website. So Facebook becomes the domain name of facebook.com. So Facebook actually stands for the company, that is Facebook. Do you get it? And then Summersoft stands for the company Summersoft. So if we have google.com, the Google stands for the company. So that is the domain name. And then we have the domain name extension. So the domain name extension actually describes the type of company the domain name belongs to. So we can have .com, which stands for commercial websites. We also have .org, which stands for non-governmental organizations. We can have .mil, which is mostly used for military websites. We have .edu, which stands for educational websites. So domain names are actually registered through various hosting companies. So what then is a hosting company? Hosting companies are companies that provide hosting services. So what actually is a hosting service? So a web hosting service is a type of internet hosting service that allows individuals and organizations to make their websites accessible via the World Wide Web. So from our previous tutorial, I made mention that if I write a website or I design a website or I develop a website on my local computer, that kind of website is accessible to only me. So to make the website accessible to the general public, it needs to be hosted onto an online server. And then the companies responsible for this are what we term to as the hosting companies, sure. All right. So let's look at some example of hosting companies. So we have Bluehost, DreamHost, Hostinger, GoDaddy, StomachHost, HostGator, A2 Hosting, 00 Web Host, and InMotion. So now let's move on to look at how we can register for a domain name. So to register for a domain name, there are some basic steps we go through. So the first one is to log on to a hosting website. So from this website that I've given, Bluehost, DreamHost, and the rest, we can log on to one of them. And then after we log on to one of the websites, we select domain or domain registration. So when we select the domain or domain registration, we move on to enter our domain name. So example can be google.com or tutorial1.com. So you enter your domain name, and then after you enter the domain name, it checks to see if it is available. If it is available, it can grant you the permission to proceed and then check out or to purchase the domain name. If it's not available, it gives you some kind of suggestions to choose from, or you can try a different domain name, and then from there we proceed on to checkout. So let's look at the steps in registering practically. So over here we have stomachhost.com. So first we've logged onto our hosting website. So the hosting website we are going to use is stomachhost.com. So after we've logged on, we move on to the domain session, and under domain session we have domain registration. So we click on domain registration. So after the page has been loading, it is telling us to search a domain. So the domain I'm going to first enter is google.com. Now let's search. So after you search, it looks through to see if google.com has actually been used or is available. So over here, it is telling us google.com is unavailable, and then it has given us some suggested domain names such as googlecompany.org, googlecompany.com, and many more. So if we do not like this, we can try another one. So we can say web tutorial, sorry, tutorial1.com. So now let's search. So now they are saying web tutorial1.com is available, meaning nobody has used it. So if this is what we want, we proceed. So we add to cart. So we proceed to make the checkout. Now, let's move on to look at the various hosting services that we have. So the first one, we have shared hosting, VPS hosting, dedicated hosting, and then the cloud hosting. So let's take them one after the other and look at how each of them functions or works. So the first one we will talk of is the shared hosting. In using shared hosting, your site is located on the same server as various other websites. So with a shared hosting, there is one particular website with which houses different websites as part of your own. So we can associate that with a child living with his parents in a single room. All the people in that house stays within one room. So that is basically how the shared hosting works. So with a shared hosting, there is one particular server with which your website and other websites are also hosted on that same server. So he says it is better for beginners because it saves cost. Since the particular server is being shared among different websites, the cost of that is very less. So the shared resources are limited when using shared hosting. So since it houses other websites as well, you are limited to certain functionalities you can perform on the server. Let's move on to look at VPS hosting. So VPS actually stands for Virtual Private Server. So with VPS hosting, every website is stored on a very powerful server that is divided into several virtual compartments. So with VPS hosting, there is one server, but within that one server is a powerful server actually. So within that server, it has been divided, or different windows has been also installed on it. So it can be associated with a child staying with his parents, but within the same house, the child is having his own room. So it is one house, but the child is having his own room. So with a VPS hosting, the server is there, and then within the server, different operating systems has been installed on the server. So with this operating system, one of them has been dedicated to only you or your website only. So as I said, a child staying with his parents in the same house, but within that house, there is a particular room that has been allocated to the child for the child only. So the same thing with VPS, one particular server that has been divided into several parts, and then these parts, one of them has been dedicated to you. So that is how the VPS hosting works. So the server software is configured separately so that each unit can function independently. So the various operating systems that has been installed on one server has been dedicated onto you, and then you alone use it. So you do not depend on the other, whereas nobody also depend on you. Unlike the shared hosting, with which one server with one operating system housing different websites. So VPS hosting is more expensive as compared to shared hosting. Now let's look at dedicated hosting. With dedicated hosting, a dedicated host is a server you have all to yourself. So with dedicated hosting, the entire server is given to you and only you. So you manage and controls everything that goes on within the server. You do not share with anybody. So everything has been dedicated onto you. So as the name goes, dedicated hosting. So the entire system has been given to you, and then you control everything within the system. So dedicated hosting offers you an entire server for yourself, thereby making it faster, more secure, and more expensive. So with dedicated host, it is very fast because you alone uses that system, and it is more secure because you alone have access to it, and then there is no third party. Unlike shared hosting, where multiple websites has been hosted on one server, and then it is much more expensive since the entire system is going to be given to you to manage. And dedicated hosting is the ideal solution for larger businesses and high traffic websites because it allows maximum customization, configuration, installation, and flexibility. So it is better for, or is the best option for higher businesses or institutions such as the universities and then banks. Do you get it? Since there is high traffic all the time, people are accessing those kind of sites, and then the rest, and then you have the ability to customize everything to fit how you prefer it. So with dedicated server or dedicated hosting, everything has been given to you and then you only. Now let's move on to cloud hosting. So cloud hosting, similar to VPS hosting, cloud hosting allows multiple virtual servers to work together to host a website or a group of websites. So with cloud hosting, it is similar to a VPS, where we said with VPS, a particular server has been demarcated and then a portion has been allocated to you. But with cloud hosting, it is a network of VPS. So when there are multiple VPS and then they are being networked together, such that if one VPS goes down, the other comes in place to take it. So this is an example of a VPS hosting. So over here, this is one VPS, this is one VPS, this is one VPS, and then this one. And then all of them has been networked together. So if one is to go down, assuming this one goes down, it can be routed. Your browser gets routed to a different hosting, a different server, so that you can get the information you are actually looking for. So we say cloud hosting is a network of multiple servers. So it's great option for large websites, including e-commerce websites, newsletters, and news blog. And then it is most expensive hosting service. So we will end here. Thank you for watching. If you find this content very useful, kindly subscribe to this channel so you can get more videos from us. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.